I'm going to begin very quickly by inviting Dr. Christoph Stückelberger on stage to share a few points that he's reached, a few thoughts that he has to share, which could be part of the continuing process after the conclusion of the conference. Christoph.
Thank you very much for the floor. I apologize I have to leave, but I want to share just two actions. Because we have been asked to be practical. And it is really a strength of this conference, in my view, to emphasize this link between conviction, values, and praxis. It's the absolute where, or God, how we call him, where action and thinking is one. Only human beings, we are not able to be always coherent between our will and our action. Concretely, globaethics.net, where I'm the founder, we have a global network on ethics with about 120,000 people around the world in all continents, 15,000, 16,000 in India. And we will spread these Anuvrat principles, helping to get this goal of these vows, because I'm convinced these are values which are beyond one worldview. It's our common values of humanity. And that's why I think it's really something we should spread. And then the second point is also to find the communalities with other such vows or lists of commitments, because there are others and we can show that they have common ground, common goal, and so our commitment and contribution can be to show the unity between these different principles that exist around the world in order to strengthen it, because we are convinced, as you, we cannot survive if we are not acting together. So these are just these two modest activities that, among others, of course, many, that we contribute, and we are deeply grateful for the moderator, for you especially organizing as the convener the whole conference. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Stückelberger, and bon voyage. May you have a wonderful trip back. And now I'd like to invite Professor Eugen from Bucharest to join us. He heads the Institute on Religious Studies. He's an Indologist. He's responsible for the Center for History of Religions at the University of Bucharest. It's a great privilege to have you among us. And if you kickstart this session with a nice punch, then what better way to conclude than with you as one of the last three speakers.
Thank you so much. Venerable monks and nuns, ladies and gentlemen, the Anuvrat for scholars I would like to share with you today, and I do hope it is doable, is to speak in front of such a distinguished assembly no more than 15 minutes. I had enough reasons for being delighted and even intimidated by the openness and warmth of your invitation, so it seems to me more appropriate to place the acknowledgements for having me at the end. When early in this summer I proposed an abstract of my paper for today, I wondered and indeed feared that every other scholar, at least not primarily working in China, but in other provinces of the eventful Indian studies, and we are here some, would somehow detect and indulge in the same topic, as described in my title, which is the greatness in discerning the small, Jain religious history and Acharya Tulsi's contribution. We are now in the third and last day of the first Anuvrat International Conference, and I am happy to report this was not the case. The majority of you consistently and admirably spoke most about Vratas and less about Anu. This should, with a particular feeling of relief for my European apprehensions, be my task now. From Anuvrat back to Nigoda, the animalculae, which explain and support the microexistence and the macro functioning of the universe, The Jain tradition has particularly proven an all-pervading sense of the smallness and its integration within the samsara as a whole. As the ninth acharya of the Therapantha Jains from 1936 to 1994, Acharya Sri Tulsi has most remarkably contributed to a revival in perceiving and practicing Anuvrat. According to his long-lasting plea, all religious evidence of caring shall discern and interact with the smallness of beings, acts, and circumstances. In my talk, I would like to briefly delineate the main profile of Anuvrat as a religious category within Jainism and the fuller history of South Asian religions, with particular emphasis of the Jain sensibility during the last century in discerning the sine qua non efficacy of smallness, starting from the microcosmic relations of vows. The failure of this macro-microcosmic equation, which marked the modern era history of Indian religions too, is captured through Anuvrat again, a religiously based equation we are not fully ready to grasp anew, or at least not that easily. I shall then comment upon the crucial stance of the Anu bomb as counterbalanced by the starting of the Anuvrat movement, that bold quote which ended Professor Tara Setia's speech and was discussed by Sadhvi Rajul Prayag G2. Finally, I choose three comparative instances from the West which I consider helpful in perceiving the globalizing the sense of Anuvrat right before the reform made by Acharya Tulsi. I felt authorized in doing this by the previous mentioning here of non-Jain authors like John Donne and Thomas Merton, who aptly shared fractions, at least, of the same worldview. This would guarantee the background for a comparative stance for the greatness in discerning the small. For in Jain India, small is certainly not as in the philosopher and anthropologist Schumacher in a very valuable paper of 1974, the small is not only beautiful, the conduct of morality lies in details. Instead of a nuclear fission, an atomic fusion of uninterrupted vows. I prepared a much longer paper on the specifics of Anu within the canonical and commentarial scriptures of Shvetambara, yet I had to abstract it in order to meet the requirements of the schedule. From where to start actually? First and foremost, I assume, by just remembering that for the followers of the creed, Jainism is everlasting. What we really live, apprehend, and or discuss, even if representing hundreds and thousands of years since Mahavira, or perhaps the Mahavira, as we say, the awakened, it is the Buddha, is one single, a fortiori very tiny fragment of the canopy of an inscrutable time, which, without known beginning and end, is incalculable, asamkhya, a term shared by the Jains and the Buddhists. Samsara itself may well look like the best grand model of circular economy of selves, and the placement of Nigoda at the bottom of this indescribable oceanic heap of life make them a reservoir having collectively the function of providing the fuel of samsara, irrespective of the quantity of siddhas, the liberated souls. The minuteness of the Nigoda counteract the magnificence of a siddha. They are in fact only complementarily opposed. The minuteness of Nigoda sustain a truly non-sectarian, pan-Jain, through Hariprabha Malishena, metaphysic of discreteness. Their inclusion at the bottom of the giant cosmic architecture of souls provides an analogy with the main objectives of an Anuvrat. Unity being much about units, the unity of being necessarily depends upon the tiniest imaginable jiva in the jiva units. The minimal vows may thus connect the status of loka with the full metabolism of individual lives. Let's remind both the insider and the outsider that the most common image of a Jain monk or nun, included since the end of the 19th century in history of religions textbooks near all over the world, testifies tacitly and yet boldly the Jain insistence on non-violence to microorganisms. Such usual images reminds the careful apprentice that economy, circular or not, unbroken or not, really is about oikumene, the human and beyond human environment. Other stances and occurrences of greatest importance for defining the sense of smallness within the Jain Therapantha community, I would like to mention that Indian sensitivity for the small among the several abhijna shared by the Jain and the Buddhist is the capacity of transforming oneself into an atom-like being. As well, the monastic regulations for walking, moreover, comforts the idea of smallness. carrying transportation step by step. After processual diminishing of units of the needs for life, the giant fasting into death may easily look like the 0 degree Kelvin of asceticism. Again, another instance, we are producing waste because we provide excessive goods, and we are producing forgetfulness because we are producing memory. From the perspective of the Anuvrat, on the contrary, the awareness, even fragmentary, corresponds in the circular model you all evoked to preservation. One reputed giant scholar from the West, who had the chance to meet and speak to Acharya Tulsi, had precisely discussed, I'm quoting Paul Dundas in his celebrated book, The Giants, the reversed macro-microcosmic functioning of Anu as the atom of the atomic bomb. If an atom has in it the monstrous power to destroy the world, amply demonstrated in the unprecedented Holocaust at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I'm quoting, of course, Acharya Tulsi, I want to tell the world that we have its counterpart in Anuvrata, a small or atomic vow, which alone has the power to ward off and counter the threat of an atomic bomb. Of course, this is for 1949, but the fervor of starting the movement belongs, I think, also to the new independent state of India. The meaning of reform or reformation is underlying the new. Jainism, by paying rigorous attention to the small units of life, is a living and lively tradition, and such a life can but meet the requirements of a precise historical present, be it that of a post-atomic bomb history. It is the singular circumstance which embraces us all, and when a single species, in the smallest part of its biological history, can really destroy, can quantificably annihilate the living earth as a whole. In the aftermath of the atomic blasts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, only a profoundly religious person might have been aware of the hugest discrepancy and secret correspondences between the nuclear action as global destruction and the ending of violence, so to say, extracting and reconverting the Anu of the Enola Gay. I would like to share with you an anecdote told to me by Professor Andrei Pleșu, one of my professors in the early 90s, who happened to be also the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania during the Balkan Wars. He was personally acquainted with the Clintons or with Arafat, and Madeleine Albright told about him that he was the cleverest foreign minister she ever met. Mr. Pleșu told me once that if the whole world functions with all its myriad problems and conflicts, this is certainly not a consequence of its leaders' awareness and skills, but somehow a collective mystery. The capacity of discerning the most minuscule acts and beings and to integrate them into the bigger or better, the biggest picture, had innumerable as well as insuperable consequences during modern giant times and indeed during Acharya Tulsi's life. The publication of giant scriptures, writes Peter Flugel, was obstructed sometimes violently by orthodox giants who objected to the cruelty of the printing press to microorganisms. And, I quote again, in some late canonical scriptures, the process of writing itself is rejected due to its cruelty to a single-sensed organism or echindrias. It is certainly not a surprise to see this particular interest for microorganism and the Anu of Anuvrat in a fundamentally continuous religious culture which discovered the very concept of zero, to see how industrious and effective became a worldview which sustains the care for the minuteness of life. Rigor cannot function without or outside the realm of respecting the small. The fundamental unity of life is an antidote to the hierarchic, mechanistic, utilitarian or cynically utilitarian vision of life as destructive competition. The three Western examples I would like to mention, which were all they all were contemporary with Acharya Tulsi, are Abi Warburg, Mircea Eliade, and Raffaele Petazzoni. You know perhaps all the rather dissimilar Denkspruch, dictum, or even a mantra of the famous historian of art Abi Warburg, or Abi Warburg, after he moved in 1933 from Hamburg to London because of his Jewish origin in Nazi Germany. In a teaching course in 1925, 1926, he had this blessed mantra, God hides in the details, the Liebe Gott steckt in Detail, as a subtitle for his very course. So this is one particular Western instance of Anu, contemporary but previous a bit to Acharya Tulsi, which may, you will see why I am mentioning it, help us to understand the possibility of developing an awareness about Anuvrat movement outside India. As my native country is the native country of arguably the most influential scholar of religion of the last century, Mircea Eliade, I wondered when and how he mentioned for the first time Jainism and perhaps even Anu in his writings. I am able to report this happened in India in 1930. As he wrote in his reminiscences, he prepared an essay in Darjeeling in a retreat after 2 Kolkata years he spent under the guidance of Surendranath Dasgupta. This paper was titled The Subjective Character of Indian Physics. It is unpublished as such during his lifetime and untranslated as such as known. In this lecture, he says, I will try to prove the subjective structure of Indian physics, namely to show that very elements which underlie this physics, which are qualities, not quantities, and the means it has in constructing the universe. He goes on, he starts as usual in his time, compiling somehow Arthur Berridale Keith with Vaisheshika, yet he adds, is not a single Indian system which admits the existence of atoms, well before the Jain and Buddhist systems conceived the sui generis atomism, which have closer ties to psychology than to physics properly. What is more important in his early, certainly shaky analysis is the conclusion. The Indian physics remains in continuous contact with human experience. The objects themselves, said Mircea Eliade, are but the residuum of our own experience. The third and last example will be Raffaele Petazzoni, perhaps the greatest comparative scholar of religion ever, but somehow neglected even by some serious scholars of Jainism, when he built upon the excellent work in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, of the young Luigi Pio Tessitori. He wrote in his 3-volume Confessione dei Peccati, the Confession of Sins, absolutely wonderful Italian book, a full chapter on Jainism, on the confession in Jainism, the basic structure and consequences of firm Jain monastic confessions, described according to the canonical text. On a regular basis, the fruitfulness of confession depends on its capacity of being a retrospective awareness. It thus regulates the practical sustainability of a religious life without the encumbrances and reluctances of cunning and forgetting. And this precisely requires an interest in the smallest unity of remembering. It corresponds, I am following here Petazzoni, to the Indo-Iranian triad of acts, mental, vocal, and bodily, for sure understudied in contemporary Indology. Those manifold forms are illuminated through confession. The ascetic life, with all its current web of regulations and net of representations, provided the main means for discerning how the contrary of a vrat enters the world of a person or a community. The reverse process, somehow pratiloman, enlighten us about the don'ts of the Therapantis, as Anuvrat does for the do's. Perhaps nowhere in the cultural history of Europe and the West such attention was favored, collectively practiced and understood than in the once queen science of philology and textual criticism. At some point since the 19th century, these two traditions, Jainism and philology, finally met. This certainly was meant and means a process of cross-fertilization, as the soil of this endeavor is a mutual one. The best recent examples I would like to emphasize are the International Journal of Jaina Studies, launched and edited by Professor Peter Flügel and his team at SOAS in London since 2005, and since 1982, Le Bulletin d'études indiennes, the Bulletin of Indian Studies, launched by Nalini Balbir, and Georges Pinot, edited by Nalini Balbir, to which I had the tremendous occasion to contribute every single volume during the last 10 years. Professor Colette Kaya used to remind the attentive students and readers that without a good knowledge of Indological history and learning in French, German, and at some point even Italian, it would be impossible for both the monk or nun, the scholar in India or in the West, or more generally all the aficionados, to capture the sense of richness, grandeur, and everlasting influence the continuous tradition of Jainism has to offer. And I moreover wonder what would have been the magnificent Indian vegetarian cuisine we all enjoyed without this perfect match of tiny flavors and imperceptible tastes, projecting even metaphysically a full accord of humans with nature and environment, thus making diet a mirror of those. May I dare in the end continue our dialogue by commenting upon some previous talk? I would like to inform Dr. Malley that the disposal removal of waste, human or not, was a full preoccupation for the monastic regulations of the Buddhists, as Gregory Chopin, a famous professor from California, from UCLA, documented in a paper from Journal Asiatique in 2008. Also, for Professor Scott Stroud, I would like to say that all the 5 requirements for Anuvrat for the citizenship of democracy are excellently documented in all the debating dialogues of the philosophical history of ancient and medieval Buddhist, Jain and Hindu thinkers, because all the requirements for a true debate were invented well before the foundation of the University of Oxford in the University of Nalanda. And finally, I would like to mention for Professor Thomas Duffern that Mendeleev in 1869, when he published for the very first time a kind of a sketch of his future table of elements, he published in the same issue with one of the most noted 19th century German, Prussian, but moved to St. Petersburg Indologist, Otto Böttling, you all know because of the Sanskrit Wörterbuch, and one scholar of Indian American scholar of science thought that the Paninian grammar served as an introduction in structuring and classifying the whole for the very young academician Mendeleev. I would like only to, just for closing my remarks, acknowledgements require a true Anekantavadin, and please excuse a novice for not being able to express them all. Thank you.